There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, that happens millions of times every single day across the Philippine archipelago. A child walks through a doorway, spots an elder seated nearby, and without hesitation, reaches out, bows slightly, and presses the back of the old person's hand to their own forehead. No words are required. No explanation is given. The meaning is ancient, layered with centuries of survival, faith, and something the modern world has been desperately trying to manufacture: genuine human connection. What you just heard describes one of the oldest living traditions on Earth. It has no viral hashtag, no corporate sponsor, and no museum exhibit to keep it alive. It lives entirely in the hands of the Filipino people, passed down not through books or classrooms, but through the warmth of family, the gravity of reunion, and the daily act of choosing respect over convenience. And the world has absolutely no idea how remarkable that is. If you are new here, this channel exists to uncover the stories the history books leave out and the traditions the world forgets to celebrate. Hit that subscribe button now, share this video with someone who deserves to know this story, and drop a like, because what you are about to learn is going to stay with you long after this video ends. The gesture is called Pagmamano. In its simplest physical form, it is the act of taking an elder's right hand, bowing toward it, and pressing its back gently to one's own forehead. The person initiating the gesture typically says two small words, mano po, which carry an ocean of meaning inside them. Mano comes from the Spanish word for hand. Po is a Tagalog particle, a tiny syllable added to sentences as a marker of deep respect and deference. Together, the phrase translates loosely as, "Your hand, please," or more poetically, "May I receive your blessing." It is a question, an offering, and an act of humility performed simultaneously in the space of a single breath. And it happens in homes, at family gatherings, after church, on the street, in airports when relatives reunite after years apart. Wherever a younger Filipino encounters someone older and wiser than themselves. To understand how this tradition has survived into the 21st century, you have to understand that it was never simply a greeting. In cultures all across the ancient world, elders held a status that went far beyond their age. They were the keepers of memory. In a time before written records were widespread, before libraries existed in every city and knowledge could be summoned from a small glowing screen in your pocket, the oldest person in the room was the most valuable person in the room. They remembered the flood that destroyed the harvest 30 years ago. They knew which plant cured fever and which one caused it. They had buried children and outlived droughts and navigated conflicts that would have broken anyone younger. In the pre-colonial Philippines, that kind of wisdom was not just respected, it was sacred. And the act of bowing toward an elder and receiving their blessing was the physical language through which that sacredness was acknowledged. Long before Spanish galleons arrived on Philippine shores in the 16th century, the archipelago was already home to sophisticated societies with deeply structured social codes. Among the Tagalog, Visayan, Ilocano, and dozens of other ethno-linguistic groups spread across more than 7,000 islands, honoring elders through gesture and language was already a cornerstone of daily life. Scholars and historians who have studied pre-colonial Philippine culture note that similar traditions of bowing and pressing hands to the forehead existed across the broader Austronesian world, from Malaysia to Indonesia, where the practice is still known as salim and salam, respectively.
This suggests that Pagmamano did not originate with the Spanish. It predates colonization by centuries, rooted in a shared cultural inheritance that once connected the peoples of maritime Southeast Asia through trade routes, language, and shared values long before any European power drew a line on a map.
When the Spanish arrived and began the process of colonizing the Philippines, they brought with them a deeply hierarchical Catholic culture in which hand-kissing was already a practiced form of reverence. Priests, bishops, and nobles received this gesture from those beneath them in the social order. It was a familiar physical vocabulary of deference, and it found surprisingly fertile ground in the Philippine Islands because something like it already existed. The blessing of the church merged with the blessing of the family. Over generations, the two streams of meaning, one indigenous, one European, flowed together into the single seamless gesture that Filipinos practice today. This kind of cultural fusion is rare. Most colonial encounters destroy what they find. The survival and transformation of Pagmamano is a quiet act of cultural resistance that history has never given enough credit to. One of the most fascinating aspects of Pagmamano is what it reveals about how Filipinos conceptualize the relationship between the physical and the spiritual. In many world cultures, blessings are understood as purely symbolic, a kind word, a prayer, a wish of good fortune. But in Filipino tradition, the elder's hand is understood as a literal conduit of grace. By pressing it to the forehead, the seat of thought, intention, and identity, the younger person is not simply acknowledging the elder. They are inviting something of the elder's life force, their accumulated wisdom, their spiritual merit, to transfer and take root. This is not superstition. It is a deeply sophisticated understanding of human connection, one that recognizes that wisdom cannot be downloaded or streamed. It must be inherited. It must be touched. It must be received with the body as well as the mind. In a world drowning in information and starving for wisdom, that understanding feels less like ancient folklore and more like prophecy. The phrase that accompanies the gesture carries its own extraordinary weight. In everyday Filipino speech, the word po appears constantly, inserted into sentences the way punctuation marks appear in text, automatically, habitually, without conscious thought. Children are taught to add po to every sentence addressed to someone older than themselves almost from the moment they begin to speak. It is the verbal equivalent of the bow, a constant low-level hum of respect embedded in the language itself. Linguists who have studied the Filipino language note that this kind of built-in honorific system is relatively uncommon compared to other world languages, and that its persistence in a culture increasingly shaped by social media, global pop culture, and English language education says something remarkable about the depth at which these values are rooted. When a tradition survives, not just in ceremony, but in the daily grammar of a people, it has become something more than custom. It has become identity. Consider for a moment what it would mean for a tradition like this to exist in other cultures. In many Western countries, the relationship between youth and age has been almost entirely inverted. Youth is marketed, celebrated, and relentlessly commodified. aging is treated as a problem to be solved, rather than a stage to be honored. Grandparents are placed in facilities, their knowledge is considered outdated, their stories are rarely sought. The psychological cost of this inversion is something sociologists have been documenting for decades. Rising rates of loneliness among the elderly, fractured family structures, a generational disconnect that leaves young people without the anchors of lived history and leaves old people without the dignity of being needed. Against this backdrop, the Filipino practice of Pagmamano is not merely charming or culturally interesting. It is a model. It is evidence that a society can choose, generation after generation, to organize itself around a different set of priorities, and that doing so shapes not just manners, but mental health, family cohesion, and communal resilience in ways that are genuinely measurable. The gesture is performed across the full spectrum of Filipino social life. It happens in humble homes in the provinces, in the air-conditioned apartments of Manila professionals, in Filipino diaspora communities from Dubai to California to Oslo. Children perform it to grandparents before school in the morning and again when they return in the afternoon. Teenagers, who in many cultures are at peak rebellion against parental authority, still pause to manopo their lolos and lolas at family gatherings. Young adults entering a room full of elders will move through it methodically, greeting each older person in turn before sitting down, because to skip someone would be considered a visible act of disrespect that reflects badly not only on the individual, but on the family that raised them. In this way, Pagmamano functions as both a personal act and a social enforcement mechanism, a way the community continuously reaffirms its values simply through the physical choreography of daily life. It is important to pause here and acknowledge that Pagmamano is not without its complexities in the modern era. As the Philippines has urbanized rapidly over the past several decades, and as more young Filipinos have grown up in cities far from provincial family structures, the practice has inevitably begun to evolve. Cultural researchers studying Filipino traditions note that the gesture is becoming less automatic in some urban environments, particularly among children raised in smaller nuclear family units with limited access to grandparents and extended family. The rise of digital communication has created generations of Filipinos who maintain relationships with elders through video calls rather than physical visits, and a mano po over a phone screen, while attempted by some with endearing creativity, carries a different kind of weight than the actual physical contact between forehead and hand. This tension between tradition and modernity is not unique to the Philippines, but it is felt there with particular sharpness because the stakes feel unusually high. And yet, what is extraordinary is how resilient this tradition has proven to be. Where other cultural practices have been quietly abandoned under the pressure of globalization, Pagmamano has demonstrated a stubborn, almost defiant persistence. Schools in the Philippines actively teach children about its significance. Cultural organizations document and promote it. Filipino parents living abroad, in the Middle East, in Europe, in North America, make deliberate efforts to instill the practice in children who have never lived in the Philippines, because they understand instinctively that the gesture isn't just a custom. It is a thread. It connects the child standing in a kitchen in New Jersey or a living room in Riyadh to something ancient and coherent about who they are. Anthropologists call this kind of cultural tenacity in diaspora communities cultural transmission under pressure, and the Filipino community consistently ranks among the most effective in the world at it. There is a specific moment in the performance of Pagmamano that often goes unnoticed, but is in many ways the most meaningful part of the entire exchange. It is the elder's response. When the younger person bows and presses the hand to their forehead, the elder does not simply stand passively and accept the gesture. In Tagalog families, the elder might say, "Nawa ay pagpalain ka ng Diyos," meaning, "May God bless you." In other regions and languages, the expression varies, but the intention is always the same. The gesture initiates an exchange. It is not a one-directional act of submission, but a conversation between generations. The young saying, "I recognize your wisdom and your sacrifice," and the old saying in return, "I see you, I love you, I wish you well." In that brief, wordless, full-bodied exchange, something genuinely profound happens, something that no algorithm has yet found a way to replicate. The spiritual dimension of Pagmamano extends further than most casual observers realize. In Filipino indigenous belief systems, which predate both Hinduism and Christianity on the islands, and which survive in syncretic forms across many communities today, the concept of spiritual power residing in living human beings, particularly those who have accumulated years and experience, was a foundational idea. Ancient Filipino cosmologies recognized various categories of spiritual force, and elders were understood to possess a form of benevolent spiritual energy that could be shared and transmitted. When Catholic missionaries arrived and began interpreting this worldview through a Christian framework, they found it easier to work alongside these existing beliefs than against them. Which is why Filipino Catholicism is famously distinct from European Catholicism. Warmer, more embodied, more comfortable with the idea that holiness can be found in human hands as readily as in church architecture. This brings us to one of the most underappreciated facts about Pagmamano: the fact that it functions, quite literally, as a daily theological statement. Every time a Filipino child presses an elder's hand to their forehead, they are enacting a belief about where wisdom comes from, what age means, and what the relationship between the living and the generations that came before them should look like. These are not abstract theological positions. They are lived ones, embodied and practiced before the child is old enough to articulate any of it in words. In developmental psychology, this kind of early embodied value formation is understood to be extraordinarily powerful, far more durable than values taught through instruction alone. What the Philippines has preserved through this single gesture is a system of intergenerational ethical formation that most of the developed world has lost entirely and is only now beginning to understand it has lost. One of the most moving expressions of Pagmamano's staying power can be found in the experience of the Filipino diaspora. The more than 10 million Filipinos living and working outside the Philippines at any given time, the largest concentration of overseas workers of any nation on earth. These men and women work as nurses in London hospitals, engineers in Saudi oil fields, caregivers in Japanese elder facilities, domestic workers in Hong Kong and Singapore. They send billions of dollars home every year. They live months or years apart from their families. And when they return, stepping off a plane after 2 years away, 3 years, sometimes longer, the first thing that happens in the arrivals hall, before any word is spoken, is the mano po. Children rush forward and reach for the hands of returning parents. Adult children kneel before aging grandparents. The gesture bridges the distance that geography could not erase. In those moments, Pagmamano reveals itself not as a relic, but as a living, functioning tool of human repair. The Philippines is a country that has endured an almost incomprehensible amount of historical disruption. 3 centuries of Spanish colonial rule, several decades of American occupation, Japanese invasion during the Second World War, decades of political instability, natural disasters on a scale that would buckle most nations, typhoons, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, and through all of it, what has survived? The language, yes. The food, yes. The faith, certainly. But also the gesture, this small, quiet, ancient act of pressing a young forehead to an old hand has endured through colonization and liberation, through dictatorship and democracy, through calamity and recovery. That is not a coincidence. Cultures preserve what they need to survive. The Philippines has preserved Pagmamano because it holds inside it something the Filipino people have always understood they cannot afford to lose. The knowledge that no person stands alone, that every individual is the product of the people who came before them, and that the least you can do is acknowledge it. In recent years, international researchers, anthropologists, and cultural commentators have begun paying closer attention to practices like Pagmamano as part of a broader global conversation about what gets lost when modernity erases tradition. There is a growing body of work suggesting that cultures which maintain strong intergenerational practices, regular, physical, ritualized contact between the young and the old, demonstrate measurable benefits in areas ranging from mental health outcomes among elders to civic engagement among youth. The isolation of the elderly in industrialized societies has been linked to cognitive decline, depression, and reduced longevity. The cultural architecture that Pagmamano creates, where no gathering begins without the young acknowledging the old, where physical contact between generations is built into the grammar of daily life, is, from a public health perspective, remarkably sophisticated. The Philippines arrived at this understanding not through clinical research or policy design, but through centuries of lived cultural wisdom. There is something quietly radical about a tradition that refuses to let you forget where you came from. In an era defined by the relentless forward momentum of technology, by the cult of the new, by an economy that markets youth and novelty as the highest values, Pagmamano insists on something different. It insists that the person who has lived the longest deserves the deepest bow. It insists that wisdom is not a content category or a search result. It is something you press your forehead against and receive in silence. It insists that every single day, before you go anywhere or do anything, you pause long enough to remember that you did not arrive here alone. You were carried here by the hands and the sacrifices and the prayers of people who came before you. And the least you can do, the very least, is touch their hands to your head and mean it. There are thousands of traditions around the world that exist only in archives now, documented in academic papers and museum exhibitions, preserved in the amber of history because no living community practices them anymore. Pagmamano is not one of them. It is alive. It is warm. It is happening right now in a province in Mindanao where a 6-year-old is greeting her Lola before school. In a hospital in Metro Manila where a nurse bows to an elderly patient out of genuine habit.
In an airport in Singapore, where a young overseas worker kneels on the arrival hall floor and presses her father's hand to her forehead after 3 years apart. The entire world has been searching for a way to reconnect across the chasm of generations, to rebuild the bonds that modernity has frayed, to find some antidote to the epidemic of loneliness and disconnection that defines so much of contemporary life. And all along, the answer has been right there. Practiced daily, inherited faithfully, held intact by a people who never once decided it was something they could afford to stop doing.